The days after Margaret's passing moved like a storm through the Bennett household. And even though Olivia tried to keep herself busy with work in Seattle, nothing prepared her for the moment she stepped back into her childhood home and saw her father, Thomas, standing in the doorway, looking smaller than she remembered. His shoulders tired, his eyes older, as if grief had carved new lines on his face overnight. And from the very first moment, she sensed something heavy lingering in the air. Something unsaid that would change everything. Part 1 begins with Olivia arriving for what she thought would be a quiet week of helping her father sort through her mother's things. But the moment she walked in, he asked her to sit down. And the tone in his voice made her heart race because it sounded like he had been rehearsing something for days. She tried to hold herself together, still mourning, still remembering her mother's gentle laugh echoing in every corner of the house. But her father's eyes followed her with a worried tenderness that made her feel both loved and unsettled. He told her he couldn't stay in the house anymore. Not because he didn't care about the memories, but because the memories were everywhere. And he could barely breathe knowing. Her mother's favorite mug was still by the window, and her unfinished book still lay on the living room table. Olivia understood loss, but she wasn't prepared for the next part. When he said he wanted to sell the house immediately and move across the country to live near an old family friend who had offered support through the grieving process, it wasn't the idea of him moving that shocked her, it was the speed, the urgency, the finality in his voice, like he was trying to escape the life he had built with her mother. Olivia felt the ground shift beneath her because this wasn't just a house. This was the home where she learned to ride a bike in the driveway, where her mother braided her hair before school, where birthdays, arguments, and every season of her life played out under one roof. She tried to respond calmly, to be the mature daughter who understood her father's pain. But inside her chest, something twisted as though her mother's memory was being folded and packed away before she was ready. Her father reached across the table, his hand trembling, and apologized for this sudden decision, saying he should have told her sooner, but he didn't know how. And hearing the break in his voice softened her anger, but it didn't erase her confusion. She asked him why he wanted to move so far. Why now? Why so fast? And his answer only made her more uneasy. He said he needed a fresh start, a place where he wouldn't wake up expecting to hear Margaret humming in the kitchen. Olivia understood grief could make people do unexpected things, but something about this felt rushed, almost desperate. And her instincts whispered that there was more her father wasn't saying. She noticed how he avoided her eyes when he explained that the friend he wanted to move near was someone her mother had trusted deeply, someone from their past she barely remembered. And though nothing he said sounded wrong, it felt incomplete, like a puzzle missing the most important piece. As the conversation went on, Olivia felt a strange mixture of protectiveness and fear rise inside her, because she wasn't ready to lose her father emotionally. Too, not after already losing her mother so suddenly. She looked around the room, the photographs on the shelves, the familiar scent of pine and vanilla her mother loved, and she felt the enormity of everything pressing down on her. Her father asked if she could stay for a few days to help look through her mother's belongings, and the request felt like both a plea and a warning, as if this was her last chance to preserve what remained of her mother's world before everything changed. Olivia agreed, though her chest tightened with the weight of it. She spent that evening walking through the rooms alone, touching the frames, the books, the old piano near the window, each item pulling memories to the surface. Her father watched her from the hallway quietly, as if he didn't want to interrupt the way she was saying goodbye without saying it. She could feel how fragile he was, how carefully he held himself together. And yet beneath all that gentleness, she sensed a secret he hadn't gathered the courage to share. That night, as she lay in her childhood bedroom, listening to the soft ticking of the hallway clock, she thought about everything her father had said and everything he hadn't. And a ripple of fear traveled through her because whatever was coming next felt bigger than selling a house or moving away. Something about his urgency, his strange calmness, and the way he kept mentioning needing permission from her, from himself, from the past, made her feel like the truth was just beginning to surface. She knew the next morning would bring answers she wasn't prepared for. And as she stared at the ceiling, feeling the weight of grief and uncertainty blend into one heavy ache, she realized part one of her life after her mother's death was just beginning. Asterisk. Emma spent the next morning trying to shake off the weight of everything she had heard the night before. Yet the thought of her mother's hidden letter kept circling in her mind like a whisper she couldn't escape. And the pressure of honoring the last request of someone she loved more than anyone else made her chest feel tight, especially because her father, Daniel, had become more distant the past few months, moving through the house like a quiet shadow lost between memories and unfinished conversations. And she feared that telling him about the letter would break something already fragile inside him. So she tried to distract herself by going to the small local cafe her mother used to love, a warm corner place in downtown Portland where her mother would always order caramel tea and talk about dreams she planned for the family. And Emma sat there hoping the familiar scent of roasted beans and soft music would calm her. Yet all it did was remind her how much had changed since her mother's death, which made her feel both lonely and restless. So she stepped outside to breathe. And that was when she ran straight into Lucas, the childhood friend she hadn't seen in years. Someone who had once promised her he would come back someday, even though she didn't believe it. But there he was, taller, softer around the eyes, carrying that same gentle smile she remembered from long summer nights near the river. And he asked her how she'd been with a voice so warm she almost cried from the simple kindness of it. And before she knew it, she told him about the house, the letter, and the fear sitting heavy in her chest. And Lucas listened with a kind of attention that made her feel safe for the first time in months, reminding her she wasn't alone. Then he suggested they take a walk near the waterfront because he knew being near the sound of waves always helped her breathe better. So they walked along the wooden pier. And Emma felt something inside her loosen as she talked about her father and how he had asked her, gently but firmly, to stay in the house with him for a while because he didn't want to live there alone. And she admitted she felt torn between supporting him and respecting her mother's final wish that he start fresh somewhere far from the memories that hurt him. And Lucas told her she didn't have to choose in one day, that sometimes the heart needs time to decide which truth hurts less. And those words made her feel understood in a way she desperately needed. But when she returned home later that afternoon, she found her father sitting at the kitchen table with an old photo album open, his hands trembling slightly as he traced her mother's smile on the faded picture. And he looked up at Emma with eyes that carried too much sadness, telling her he had something he needed to admit, something he had been hiding because he didn't want to worry her. And the moment he said that, Emma's heart began racing, afraid he was sick or planning to leave or carrying some dark secret. But instead he explained that after her mother's death, he had wanted to sell the house immediately, not because he didn't care about it, but because every room felt too heavy to breathe in. Yet he stopped himself when he realized Emma still needed time to say goodbye to the life they once had. And he didn't want to rush her grief just because his own felt overwhelming, which stunned her because she had believed the opposite, that he wanted to stay forever. So hearing the truth made her feel both relieved and guilty. And before she could gather her thoughts, he added that he had also considered moving to a smaller town near Seattle where he could restart his job and find some peace. But he feared Emma would think he was trying to erase her mother, which he would never do. And Emma felt her throat tighten because the letter in her pocket suddenly felt heavier than ever. Yet she couldn't bring herself to tell him about it in that moment because he looked so vulnerable, so tired, and she didn't want to break him with the truth too quickly. So she simply sat beside him, placing her hand over his, and told him that whatever decision they made about the house, they would make it together. But the lie of omission echoed in her chest because she knew the letter carried a request he deserved to know. And she felt torn between honesty and protection, unsure which choice honored her mother more. And that night, after her father went to bed, Emma stepped outside into the cool air and called Lucas, needing someone to talk to. And he answered on the first ring like he had been waiting, listening carefully as she confessed that she was scared of telling her father about the letter because once she did, everything would change: his plans, his emotions, their whole future. And Lucas told her he understood because grief can make even simple truths feel dangerous. But he also reminded her that love meant trusting the other person with your fear, not hiding it. And his words stayed with her as she stood on the porch, staring at the dim lights of the neighborhood, feeling the weight of choices piling on her shoulders. And as they talked, she suddenly realized Lucas wasn't just comforting her. He was becoming the one person she felt drawn to in a way she hadn't allowed herself to feel for anyone since her mother's passing. A warmth that scared her yet filled her with hope. And when she finally hung up the phone, she felt something shift inside her. A quiet clarity mixed with a growing ache. Because she knew she couldn't hide the truth from her father much longer. But she also sensed that once she revealed the letter, their lives would take a direction she couldn't predict. And the thought of losing what little stability they had left made her stomach twist. So she whispered a silent promise to herself that tomorrow she would tell him everything. Yet deep down she feared the conversation would unlock emotions neither of them were ready to face. And as she stood there alone under the gentle glow of the porch light, she felt the winds change around her, carrying the unmistakable feeling that her mother's final request was about to reshape not only her father's future, but her own. And the question that haunted her wasn't whether she should tell him, but what would happen afterward, especially now that Lucas was back in her life when she least expected it. Stirring feelings she wasn't prepared to navigate while her family stood on the edge of change. The days after the letter arrived felt heavier than the first weeks after Mother had passed. Emily couldn't stop thinking about what her father had asked her to do. And every time she looked at him, she saw that quiet desperation in his eyes. David had always been strong, steady, the kind of father who never let emotions show too much. But now there was something fragile about him, something that made Emily's heart ache. He tried to hide it behind polite words and quiet meals, but she knew him too well. One evening, as the autumn sunlight streamed through the kitchen window, painting golden lines across the old oak table, David finally spoke in a voice that trembled slightly. "Emily," he began, I need to start over. I can't live in this house with all these memories alone." She felt a knot in her chest. She understood that he wasn't just talking about moving. He meant opening his heart again, letting someone new in. Someone who could bring light back into a life that had felt empty for so long. Emily's mind raced. Could she even imagine that? Could she imagine someone new in her father's life after Mother? The thought felt like betrayal, yet she couldn't ignore the loneliness she saw in his eyes. That night she lay awake, listening to the silence of the house, the ticking clock, the subtle creak of the floorboards, and the memories of laughter that used to fill these rooms. Her mother's voice seemed to whisper from every corner. But there was also David, sitting in the living room, staring at the fire, lost in thought. A few days later, Emily met with a friend at a small cafe downtown, needing someone outside her family to talk to. Sarah listened patiently as Emily poured her heart out, speaking about the letter, about her father, about the strange pull she felt toward protecting him, while also understanding he deserved happiness. Sarah leaned forward, her eyes soft but firm. "Emily, it's okay to feel conflicted. You want him happy, and you want to honor your mother's memory. Those things aren't opposite. They can exist together." Emily nodded, sipping her coffee slowly, but the warmth didn't reach her heart. She left the cafe feeling heavier, carrying a mix of guilt, fear, and a surprising spark of curiosity. That spark would not go away. A week later, David asked her to join him on a drive. The autumn leaves swirled around the car as they drove toward the outskirts of town. The silence in the car wasn't uncomfortable, just full of unspoken tension. Finally, he stopped at a small bidon breakfast that he had been considering buying. "I thought maybe this could be a fresh start," he said softly. Emily looked at him, searching for any hidden meaning, any indication that he was asking her to make a decision for him. But he only met her gaze with quiet hope. She realized then that the decision wasn't about her. It was about him finding a chance to breathe again, to heal, to live. The next few days passed in a blur. Emily helped him organize the papers, clean the rooms, even repaint walls. In those moments, working side by side, she felt a strange closeness to him. Not just as her father, but as a man who had been carrying grief in silence, as someone who deserved love again. One afternoon, while hanging curtains in the sunlight-filled living room, David brushed against her arm, and for a moment, Emily felt a warmth she hadn't expected. It wasn't romantic in the usual sense, but it was a tender, human connection that she had forgotten existed outside of friendship. That evening, they shared dinner in the little dining area of the bed and breakfast. Their conversations soft, touching on memories of her mother, her childhood, and even small dreams they had put aside. Emily began to understand something she hadn't realized before. Grief doesn't vanish with time, but love can grow again, in different ways, layered over the memories, not erasing them, but honoring them. Then, one rainy night, as Emily was sorting through old letters in the attic, she found something she hadn't expected. Letter addressed to her father from someone named Claire. The envelope was worn, the ink slightly faded, but the words inside spoke of long-lost friendship, admiration, and subtle longing. Her heart skipped a beat. Could this be the person he was thinking about? She wasn't sure if she should tell him she found it or keep it a secret, but curiosity pulled her forward. The next morning, she mentioned the letter casually, and David's eyes widened slightly. He took it in his hands as though it were a fragile piece of the past he had almost forgotten. "Claire," he said quietly, a mixture of surprise and nostalgia in his voice. Emily watched him, realizing that this moment was pivotal. This letter wasn't just paper. It was a doorway to his own heart, two feelings he hadn't dared to acknowledge for years. And suddenly, Emily knew that her role wasn't to decide his future, but to support him as he navigated it. That night, as she lay in bed, listening to the rain tapping softly against the window, she felt something shift within her, a quiet understanding that love, even after loss, could take many forms. She didn't know what would happen next, but for the first time in weeks, she felt anticipation instead of dread. The next morning, David left a note. "Meet me at the old bridge. I need to show you something." Emily's heart raced. She didn't know what he wanted to show her, but the words carried a weight, a promise of revelation, and a spark of hope she hadn't felt in a long time. Standing at the edge of the bridge later that day, with the wind tugging at her hair and the river flowing beneath them, she felt the tension in her chest loosen slightly. David turned to her, eyes glistening with a mix of emotion. "Emily, I don't know what comes next," he said, "but I want to try. I want to live again. I need someone to remind me that happiness is still possible." And in that moment, Emily realized that the path forward would be complicated, filled with uncertainty, longing, and heartbreak. But it could also be beautiful in ways she hadn't yet imagined. The bridge wasn't just a place over water, it was a bridge between the past and the future, grief and love, and the beginning of something fragile yet powerful. As they stood together, the wind whipping around them, Emily felt her heart pull toward him, not as a daughter, not as a caretaker, but as someone witnessing a man she loved find his chance at life again. She didn't know how far they would go, but the journey had begun. And the next step hung in the air, waiting for both of them to take it. Emily felt the morning sun warm her face as she walked toward the small cafe where her father had asked her to meet him. Her heart was a tangle of curiosity, worry, and something deeper she couldn't quite name. David was already there, sitting at a corner table, hands wrapped around a cup of coffee, staring out the window at the street, lost in thought. When he saw her, a small smile tugged at his lips, but there was a nervousness she had rarely seen in him before. The weight of grief and longing seemed to lift slightly as she sat down, and for a moment the silence between them felt comfortable. It's like a shared secret. Then David took a deep breath and spoke, his voice soft but steady. "Emily, I met someone recently. Someone who reminds me of what I've been missing. Her name is Claire. She was a friend long ago, but we lost touch. I saw her again last week and everything felt right, in a way I didn't think possible after losing your mother." Emily felt a rush of conflicting emotions. Relief that her father might find happiness, but also a pang of jealousy and confusion she didn't expect. Her mind flashed back to all the times she had seen him alone, cooking dinner quietly. walking through the empty house, and she realized how much she had feared losing him to despair, not to someone else. But the truth was, she wanted him happy. And that meant letting go of the fear that she could ever replace her mother or stand in the way of new love. She nodded, swallowing the lump in her throat, and managed a small smile. "I think she'll be good for you, Dad. I just want you to be happy." David reached across the table and squeezed her hand, and Emily felt the warmth of that simple gesture. The trust and love between them, stronger than ever. Over the next few weeks, Claire became a part of their lives, slowly, gently. She wasn't a replacement. She was a reminder that life could continue, that love could grow again, and that grief didn't have to be the only story in their home. Emily watched as her father laughed more freely, helped her around the bed and breakfast with renewed energy, and even planned little outings, inviting her along. At first, it was strange to see him with someone else, but gradually, Emily found herself smiling at their easy conversations. The way Claire listened to him, the way she encouraged him to embrace life again. One evening, Emily joined them for a quiet dinner at the bed and breakfast, the warm lights reflecting off the walls, casting soft shadows on the table. The three of them talked about memories, plans, and small dreams, and for the first time in years, Emily felt the house feel alive again. She realized that love could exist in layers, that the memory of her mother didn't vanish but mingled with new joy, creating a fuller, richer life. As the days passed, Emily also began to understand her own heart in ways she hadn't before. Watching her father embrace happiness allowed her to reflect on her own desires, her own capacity for love and connection. She realized that caring for someone didn't mean losing yourself, and that letting others heal didn't diminish her grief, honored it by showing how resilient the heart could be. One late afternoon, she and David were painting the fence around the bed and breakfast together, laughing over splashes of paint and clumsy mistakes. When he paused and looked at her with an intensity she hadn't seen before, "Emily," he said quietly, "I want you to know that your support has meant everything. I don't think I could have started this chapter without you." She smiled, feeling the tears threatening to fall, not from sadness, but from relief, love, and pride. She squeezed his shoulder gently. "I just want you to be happy, Dad. That's all I've ever wanted." The evening air cooled, and the sky turned shades of pink and purple, reflecting the warmth in their hearts. Later, as Emily sat on the porch steps, Claire joined her with 2 cups of tea, handing one to her with a shy smile. They talked quietly, sharing small stories about the past, laughing softly. And Emily realized that she didn't feel threatened or unsure anymore. She felt grateful for her father, for Claire, for the possibility of love after loss, and for her own ability to embrace change. Time passed, and the bed and breakfast flourished, becoming a place of warmth and welcome, laughter and memory. David and Claire's relationship grew steadily, built on patience, understanding, and a shared desire to heal together. Emily found herself not just a witness, but a participant in this new chapter, her heart expanding to hold both memory and present joy. One evening, as the three of them watched the sunset from the porch, Emily reflected on how much had changed since her mother's passing. There was sorrow, yes, but also resilience, hope, and a quiet magic in the way life continued to surprise them. She realized that the bridge they had stood on weeks ago had been more than a symbol. It had been a turning point, a chance to step forward into uncertainty with courage and love. That night, as the stars began to twinkle above, Emily went to bed with a sense of peace she hadn't felt in a long time. She knew that life would always carry moments of longing, sadness, and challenge, but it also carried the capacity for renewal, connection, and gentle, enduring love. She drifted off to sleep thinking of her father, thinking of Claire, and thinking of herself. Finally understanding that happiness wasn't about forgetting the past, it was about embracing the future, fully and bravely, in the quiet of the house. Emily realized that the story they were all living wasn't just about grief or longing. It was about love in its many forms, about courage in the face of heartbreak, and about the quiet, beautiful ways life moves forward when hearts are open. And as the night settled over the town, she knew that their journey was far from over, but it was theirs to walk together, filled with hope, tenderness, and the promise of new beginnings.